Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this logistics webinar around the Ever Given aftermath. My name is Anders Schulze, and I'm the Global Head of Ocean Freight here at Flexport. I'm super excited to spend the next 15 minutes or so with all of you around a quick update on the situation and the outlook ahead of us with the aftermath. We're all acutely aware of the eventful past couple of days in global trade. For almost a full week, the Ever Given was blocking the Suez Canal, basically holding back almost 15% of the global trade. Nearly 500 vessels were waiting to pass the Suez Canal in both directions, including more than 500,000 of containers on board container ships. There's a lot of guesstimates out there, but I think it's safe to say that this event alone cost more than $60 billion. Fortunately, we all got good news on Sunday night when the vessel was freed, but now we're left with a massive aftermath out there. Today, I'm being joined by two phenomenal freight experts in both ocean freight operations and ocean salvage. First off, welcome to David Stirling, CEO of Stirling Salvage. David is one of the leading ocean salvage experts out there, so super excited to pick your brain, David, from your extensive experience. Also, welcome to our very own Nathan Strang, Head of Ocean Freight Operations in North America here at Flexport. Let's dive in. Over to you, David. We've all been following the news intensely, a lot of information out there, but help us understand what really happened here.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. We've heard quite a few reports of what the causes were, ranging from mechanical breakdowns and wind and gusting winds and poor visibility. And I think, to be fair, as in most incidents, it's a combination of various effects. If you can imagine a vessel the size of the Ever Given, from the waterline up to the top of the bridge is probably 60 meters, 200 feet. So there's a huge sail area there, and if the wind is coming from directly abeam from the side, the wind loading alone on the containers and the vessel must be something around 300 tons. So trying to maintain a vessel of that size in the center of a channel with these weather conditions, gusty winds, poor visibility is quite a challenging task for any pilot or ship's master. The other contributory fact is what's known by ship masters, people who handle ships regularly, is called the bank effect. It's based on an old principle that was discovered back in the 18th century by a physicist called Bernoulli. And the principle is that when a medium such as water or air increases speed, it causes a suction effect, and we see that quite regularly in aircraft. The aircraft wing causes the airspeed to increase as it goes over the top of the wing, and the suction effect lifts the aircraft into the air. In the context of a ship, it works in two ways. The most common is called squat. So when a ship is in a narrow channel and there's a small underkeel clearance, the water accelerates underneath the keel, and as it accelerates, it creates a suction effect, and the ship gets deeper and deeper in the water, depending on how fast it's going, and that causes the ship sometimes to touch the bottom or to ground while it's steaming along. The other way that it affects a vessel is at the sides. When a vessel is passing through a canal, the water is displaced, and the water runs down the side of the ship, and it has to accelerate to get past the vessel, and this causes a low pressure or a suction area at the sides of the ship. Now, when the ship is in the middle of the channel, the suction is the same on both sides, and there isn't an issue. But when the vessel gets to one side or the other, there becomes an imbalance in the suction, and the suction closest to the canal bank is greater than the suction to the side that's in the center of the channel. So there's this imbalance, and the bank effect tends to draw the vessel closer to the bank, and closer to the bank, to the point that it'll touch the bank. In this particular case, watching the AIS simulations from Fleetmon, it seems that the vessel was initially close to the right-hand bank, and then she swerved across to the left-hand bank. And in the minute before she grounded, she was very close to the left-hand bank, and she swerved across to the point that the stern almost touched the bank as she veered across to the right. And to me, it seems a very clear example of bank effect that caused the swing to starboard to the point that she wasn't able to correct, and her nose, her bulbous bow touched the right-hand bank. The main contributing factor to bank effect is speed. The faster a vessel is going through the channel, the greater the suction, the greater the pressure, and the more difficult it is to control it. So when you combine the effect of the wind effect pushing it to one side and the imbalances of forces within the channel, I think it's a fairly clear case that that's what the cause was.
Thanks, David. Super insightful. Obviously, I mean, this was, quite the location to say the least, but how would you compare this salvage operation relative to some of what you've seen in your time? How big of a deal was this really?
From a technical perspective, it's a fairly straightforward operation. We're in a canal. We're in a very calm environment. No passing ships, no weather, no swell. Some gusts of wind, but nothing that would hamper the operation from working full speed. So technically, it's quite straightforward. The difficulty is that the vessel was wedged. She'd buried her bulbous bow in one bank, and her stern had slid up on the other. And usually in a grounding situation, one end is free, and the tugs can connect and work the stern back and forwards, overcoming friction and slowly working away. But of course, in the canal, with such limited maneuverability for the tugs, they didn't have the option to connect to the stern. They didn't have the ability to develop momentum and move back and forwards. So it really became a case of they had a few options available to them. They were fortunate in that the vessel ran aground on a neap tide. So for the mariners amongst us, the neap tides are the lowest tides during the month, and the spring tides are the highest. So having run aground on the neap tide, the salvors were aware that 7 days later, the tides were going to be 50, 60, 70 centimeters higher, and Mother Nature would help give 10,000 tons of buoyancy to refloating. Had it been the reverse, running aground on a spring tide, it could have been 2 weeks before the tides reached the same level again, before the vessel could be refloated. So really the only two options at the time were to dig away the canal and remove the ground that was holding the vessel in position, or to remove containers. And removing containers, in my opinion, was a nightmare scenario because of the availability of cranes of that size to reach to the top containers and remove them was very remote that such a crane would be available at short notice. So I think to a certain extent there was a good deal of luck involved. Salvors were fortunate that they were in a good location and were able to develop the plan that they did without having to bring in large amounts of expensive equipment. Indeed, we all appreciated that log right there and the timing of the tide. Thanks for sharing, David. Super insightful. Let's pivot to you, Nathan. While this was resolved faster than some had foreseen, the aftermath now is staggering. Help us understand what's going on out there.
Yes, absolutely. So obviously, as the vessel was stuck and the canal was closed, vessels that were scheduled to transit were still arriving. So we saw about 6 days worth of vessel backlog at Suez. As you mentioned earlier, it amounted to about 500 vessels of all different types, from container ships to livestock ships to oil tankers. At about day 2, a couple carriers decided to reroute vessels, 27 vessels on both sides of the canal. They decided to reroute around Africa via the Cape of Good Hope. That actually, it increased the transit by about 7 days, but it helps things at the canal by pulling away that many more vessels that have to get through. So that actually kind of helped things a little bit. In the near term, though, what's going to happen with that is that we're definitely going to see bunching at European ports. As you can see on the right side of the slide there, the ports are already backed up due to kind of vessel bunching and arrivals. The ones going through the Suez ought to kind of naturally spread out as it takes time to clear that backlog. It's probably going to take through the weekend to do that. But the ones coming around Cape of Good Hope are going to show up at about the same time. It's about 200,000 TEU all showing up within a couple days of each other. So what might happen there due to the bunching, due to the fact that these vessels are delayed anyways, every vessel is going to be delayed at least a week. You may see reduced time in port to try and recover those schedules. That's going to lead to export cargo and empty equipment being left behind. And then that's going to lead to more longer term delays. So delays on Europe and East Coast services. We've already seen indications of blankings on other trades. So the Far East westbound, as many on the call are aware, is one of the more expensive as far as cargo prices go. So carriers may start blanking trans-Pacific routes, transatlantic routes in order to recover those Far East, the more lucrative Far East routes. Maersk also last night announced that due to these equipment balances and just trying to get vessels back on schedule, that there is a booking stop for their spot cargo. I don't know if other carriers will follow on that. Maersk seems to be particularly impacted by these delays, but that is something we need to look at going forward and keep a very close eye on, is what's going on with equipment at origin and what's going on with blank sailings and the booking stops.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Nathan. Super insightful. So essentially, I mean, this means a capacity reduction across the board, both in terms of vessel capacity and equipment. As Nathan just told us, I mean, there will be sort of a domino effect in terms of vessels getting back to Asia. And the equipment situation is already somewhat critical. We have known that for months. We were literally just, seeing light at the end of the tunnel with equipment availability indices increasing. And now this curveball will just prolong that situation. Right here, we have sort of depicted a snapshot on the Far East westbound capacity outlook. You can see that the coming weeks in terms of vessels leaving Asia, not too much of an impact, but once we see the ripple effect of the delays, we will expect to see more capacity reductions. In the red right here, you can see the expectations the weeks ahead. In some weeks, we could foresee potentially as much as 30% capacity reductions on the Far East westbound trade alone. So it's quite dramatic. The best recommendation from a Flexport perspective is to book as far out in advance as possible when it comes to placing the shipment bookings, and be as flexible as possible when it comes to equipment sizes and ports of loading. So the best recommendation is to follow the updates on a daily basis. The situation is quite fluid, and as Nathan just mentioned, this will not only impact U.S. East Coast and Far East westbound. It's now going to be somewhat of a shared global burden, where the carriers will try and optimize both their vessel space and equipment flow globally. Back to you, David, to learn a bit more about what to expect going forward in terms of canal operations, vessel requirements, and so forth. What to expect?
Thank you. Yeah, on slide 7, the 50 years of container ship growth, it's interesting to note that the very first vessel shown there, the Encounter Bay, was the sister ship to one of my very first ships when I went to sea. And back in 1976, 1,500 TEU container ship was the biggest ship I'd ever been on. And when you compare that to the sort of 2017, 21,000 TEU, I mean, the difference in size is quite staggering, really. And in the left-hand column also, the American New York 1984 built is the same size as the APL Panama, which grounded in Ensenada in 2005-06, and that was one of the biggest ever salvage operations of a container ship, and I think it's still the biggest salvage award in history as far as I know. But no, just listening to Nathan speaking and looking at the costs of the salvage operation compared to the costs of the delays and the liabilities, there's a real imbalance here. As you know, a ship has three types of insurance. There's hull and machinery, which covers damage to the ship. There's cargo insurance, which covers loss of cargo. And there's third-party liability, which is pollution, wreck removal, delay claims, obstructions, and so on. And taking a sort of very conservative value of what the salvage cost might be, I would estimate $20 million, probably not more than that. But when you look at the reported figures for the liability claims, I've heard between 150 and $250 million for delays and obstructions. So there's a huge imbalance in the cost of the salvage and the cost of the claims. And of course, the liability claims are paid by P&I underwriters, and they really don't have a say in the salvage operation, and they're the ones who stand to risk the most in this type of incident. And my feeling is that the liability underwriters need to become more proactive instead of sitting back and saying, we'll let the salvors get on with it, and the hull and machinery underwriters should be paying. But faced with such losses and costs, I think the liability underwriters, the P&I clubs, have to step in and become more proactive in what salvage services are available, especially in critical areas like the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, Malacca Straits, where traditionally there isn't a great deal of salvage equipment standing by. And for a relatively modest amount, they could have a stockpile of salvage equipment and high capacity winches and pullers that could be deployed in a few days, and we would save millions of dollars a day in potential claims. And I think that's something that's very easy for the P&I clubs to do, because the P&I clubs have what's called the international group. The 13 main P&I clubs, which cover 90% of shipping around the globe, have the international group, and their members are represented there, and they have pooling arrangements and reinsurance arrangements, and they cooperate in a commercial way very, very closely. But it needs a bit more coordination and preventing casualties happening in the first place, and having a fast response capability when the worst does happen. In this particular case, we were lucky that it was never going to be a very long operation. It was always going to be dictated by the time of the tides. But had it happened a week later, the operation could have taken 2 or 4 weeks. And if we have $250 million worth of delay claims, so for a 7-day shutdown in the canal, one can only imagine what the claims would be for a 4-week shutdown. So the underwriters are the ones best placed to prepare for the next event. I don't think the Suez Canal Authority has a great deal of interest, because the regulations for the Suez Canal pretty much say they're scot-free. If anything happens, it's not their fault, and if you can prove it's their fault, they don't have to pay anyway. So they have nothing to lose in a major event like this.
To your point, David, around had it not been for the tide, this could have dragged out for weeks, literally. How to prevent something like this happening in future? Would the Suez Canal Authority, start to sort of expand the canal, widen it? What do you think is going on there at the moment?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what's going on. The last time I went through the Suez Canal, we were towing a submersible rig from Korea to the North Sea, and the canal require you to have a minimum speed. We had we went into the anchorage at Suez, and we had to do sea trials to show that we could achieve a minimum speed of 7 knots because the canal they work a convoy system, and you have to have a minimum speed to keep up with the convoy. Otherwise, you're delaying the convoy going in the opposite direction. For a vessel like the Ever Given, the best way to avoid something like this happening is to reduce speed, and there's a conflict of interest. That you're slowing the convoys down in order to be more safe, and it'll take a bit of a hard sell, I think, to convince the canal authorities to go for a solution like that. Because of the size of the ship, there's not much more you can really do. Having escorting tugs isn't going to help because everything happens so quickly. The tug will not be there in the right place at the right time to stop it from happening. And a ship that weighs 200,000 tons, traveling at 8 knots, being propelled by an 80,000 horsepower engine has an awful lot of momentum, and takes a lot of stopping. And when there is an obstruction, it just rolls straight up. Unfortunately, the banks of the canal are sloping, so it's not like bouncing off a wall. You ground, and you get pushed further and further out of the water until your momentum is lost. And traveling at 8 knots, it's a difficult speed. At 8 knots, your bow thrusters aren't effective, and a vessel when it's steaming ahead, its pivot point is about a third of the way from the bow. So small corrections of the bow mean large corrections at the stern. So if you deviate 1 meter at the bow and you try and correct, you have a 2 meter deviation at the stern. So the whole nature of ships and the way they work means it's very likely that a wide ship in a narrow canal is going to get too close to the one bank at the stern and lose control. And I certainly don't think this is a one-off event. It's going to happen again in the future. Just the right or the wrong combination of weather and speed and vessel size and where it is in the canal. Some sections of the canal are quite narrow. When you get up into the bitter lakes, it opens up and becomes less confined. So I believe that there needs to be management rules and procedures, and it may be a case that one convoy every 2 or 3 days is large vessels, so they put weather restrictions on large high-sided vessels, like crossing a bridge. If you have a high-sided truck and you're going across the Golden Gate Bridge in a storm, they'll restrict the size of vessels that are allowed to go across until the wind drops to a certain level again. But of course, for container ship operators and charterers, they run to very tight schedules, and they know 14 days in advance what time they're going to be arriving at the pilot in Rotterdam, and having the uncertainty of weather restrictions and for a canal transit would really mess schedules up quite considerably, I think. So I don't see any obvious answers at the moment. There's a lot of questions arising from this, and it'll be interesting to see what the Canal Authority and ship owners and their underwriters decide as the most appropriate solution.
Indeed. That will be very interesting to follow. What's your perspective here, Nathan? Do you think that we'll go back in time, shrink the size of the vessels, and eventually see smaller vessels again to sort of prevent this happening going forward?
I don't see the vessels getting smaller. I think for the economies of scale, it just makes sense, especially in the Far East westbound, to have the larger vessels there. Their cost per mile allows them to be more profitable. Also, we have to look at the IMO regulations around emissions. The easiest way to address things like IMO 2020 and IMO 2050 and the reduction of emissions is bigger vessels. So a larger vessel, a 24,000 TEU vessel, emits more than a 10,000 TEU vessel on a vessel per vessel basis, but on a container per container basis, it does not. So it allows them to meet their restrictions. It allows them to meet their economies of scale and what do they want to optimize for, right? So, in business, they want to optimize for profit and also want to keep rates low so people keep booking and meet all their regulations. And as of now, the easiest way to do that is these super large vessels.
Makes sense. Talking about mitigating risk, having sort of a resilient supply chain, what are your best recommendations going forward, Nathan, for any shippers out there?
No, I think David hit it on the head as well when he said that this is going to happen again, and we've seen it happen before, and we've also seen it in other ways. Panama Canal has restrictions every time there's drought and the water gets low. We've seen the backups here in Los Angeles and on the west coast of the United States. Rotterdam, as we mentioned before, is backed up. So the best way you can deal with this actually is to plan ahead. It's to build a resilient supply chain that won't be impacted by any one shutdown. So for those shipping out there, look at your supply chain. Look at the ways your vessels are going. Where are they routing? How much risk do you have on any one lane, on any one service, on any one carrier? And really talk to your logistics teams about how you can mitigate that, how you can get ahead of it. We have a lot of options out there now. The Belt and Road Initiative with China Rail to Europe is really taking off. You're seeing sea-to-air products come in to the market again, where vessels will come on an expedited service into a Los Angeles, and then the cargo will shift to air and fly to Europe. I think all of those things are really important to look at, and you should take these opportunities where you have an incident like this to meet with your supply operations teams, to meet with your logistics providers and say, what does my supply chain look like? Where are my risks and what can I do to mitigate them? And that will ensure that any one shutdown won't shut down your total supply chain.
Thanks so much for sharing those recommendations, Nathan. If you have any follow-up questions, please submit them via the Flexport app. If you are already an existing Flexport customer, we'll make sure that the squad get back to you immediately with any answers. If you're new to Flexport, please go into flexport.com and ask any questions, any follow-up questions you may have as well. We deliberately chose to just keep this webinar sort of brief. So yeah, any follow-up questions, please shoot them to us subsequently. Thanks so much to both of you for joining today, David, Nathan. This was super insightful. Really, really appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone out there.